Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CRE PN Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is J. Darren Gross. This is the podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today, my guest is Zack Flora. Zack is the Vice President of Market Growth at the Center for Active Design and Active Design Advisors, Inc. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Zack about how commercial and industrial building owners can increase their property valuations through green initiatives. But first, a quick reminder, if you like our show, CRE PN Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us out. You can like, share, and subscribe. And as always, we encourage you to leave a comment. We love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you want to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. And you can find us on YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And while you're there, please subscribe. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Zack. Welcome to CRE PN Radio.
Darren, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm looking forward to our conversation today. But before we get into it, if you could take just a minute and share with the listeners a little bit about your background.
Sure, absolutely. So I have been working for the Center for Active Design and Active Design Advisors, Inc. on the kind of Fitwell platform, which is a healthy building platform, for the last 4 years. And my primary role is to work across the real estate community with some large real estate investors, owners, and managers on how they can optimize their properties, looking at green and healthy building initiatives to kind of maximize value or maximize impact, and how to bake those things into some broader sustainability or ESG initiatives. And my background is not necessarily in commercial real estate directly. I have some experience in health and wellness and well-being, and working for some real estate related platforms and research sites. But I've been able to, in the last 4 years, really help the real estate community better understand what it means to be a green or healthy building, and how that translates into kind of a return on investment for their stakeholders, whether it be their occupants themselves or their investors.
No, that's great. So talking about green versus conventional, there's I guess a plethora of whether it be systems or ways you can implement this. Are there some examples that are like some go-to examples that are the easy, kind of the low-hanging fruit that you typically recommend building owners employ?
Yeah, so I think there's various ways people can think about green and healthy buildings, and a few tend to bubble to the surface as ones that are easy for people to look at. And one of those might just be simple as accessibility. Are commercial properties, industrial, office, multifamily, are they in walkable neighborhoods, pedestrian accessible, access to public transportation and bike infrastructure? These type of things kind of promote physical activity, promote mental health optimal mental health outcomes, but also the use of public transit and active transportation can help reduce things like air pollution and congestion, and just create overall greener environments. Secondly, I think nature and just access to nature and prioritizing that. So having things like street trees in neighborhoods or in public spaces, or creating well-landscaped public spaces and outdoor spaces, again, helps to decrease stress, can also oftentimes improve physical activity by making those kind of pedestrian infrastructure more exciting or more accessible. But also, again, having that natural element such as trees helps to reduce the exposure to pollutants by controlling some things like air quality. And finally, things like safe siting. So are you able to locate projects away from environmental hazards such as landfills or power plants or contaminated sites? again, going along the lines of helping to reduce kind of stress and anxiety and improve mental health outcomes of your occupants, whether they be commercial, office, industrial, or multifamily, but also kind of cutting your exposure to those contaminants or pollutants that might be in the air and pose a danger to your health. Those are three that I think are come to mind for a lot of people. But when we talk about green buildings and healthy buildings, it's a much more, I think, dynamic and comprehensive viewpoint, especially over the last few years. I think COVID-19 has really changed our view of what it means to be a green or healthy building. Many years ago, there was a study, I think, by CRE that looked at what do occupants want in buildings, and natural daylight was one of the main things. And that's another, aspect of green and healthy buildings, access to a prioritization of natural light indoors. But today, I think things like indoor air quality and cleaning protocols are really front of mind for a lot of employers and their employees in terms of what does it mean to be kind of a green and healthy, a healthy building or a green and healthy site.
That's funny. Everything you mentioned there was not on my radar as far as what I thought you might identify. I had like light bulbs and or some sort of like more of like an energy kind of thing, as opposed to the green. I mean, the physical green space. I mean, it's basically about like you said, creating more of an environment where people are able to kind of interact more with nature and all that, or just have more of that connection there. And I can imagine that as a person in that environment, that all of a sudden it's just there's a level of calm or a just a more desirable place to be. Is that kind of, I mean, what I guess the question and kind of what I'm trying to reconcile it. So in the efforts to make more of a green design, is there something that you can measure, or that there's a way to measure something that's more green, less green? Is there a scale, or how do you measure that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the idea of green buildings has really evolved, right? So from the 80s, thinking about sick building syndrome, to the early 2000s, when we're thinking really about kind of light bulbs and energy efficiency. Today, when we think about green buildings, we take, I think, a much more human-centric approach to say, how are green buildings improving our environmental metrics or the environmental KPIs that we have set for us, which might be things like energy use or waste and water, things like that. But it also has to have a human component to it that's much more tangible. So a lot of those things I mentioned earlier, things like accessibility, access to nature, a lot of times they're much more tangible to the occupants inside, and they help to really add some texture to the things you're doing for those to create green and healthy buildings. And again, the last couple of years have really shifted the conversation from, I only need to think about energy efficiency because that's going to help reduce operating costs for myself, or reduce operating costs or reduce kind of occupancy costs for my tenants. But how do I actually look at and think about the tangible aspect of creating environments that improve mental health, where tenants or employees can see the things that we're doing to create environments that are green and healthy. And I think you actually hit something right on the head there, which is you have to be able to kind of measure the impact on health. And the Fitwell system is real, and platform is crucial to a lot of companies kind of really understanding what it means to be a green and healthy building, because it allows them to take those evidence-based design and operational strategies that are part of the Fitwell standard and use those to prioritize health and green building initiatives across their buildings, across their sites, across their communities, and then ties those strategies. So things like creating access to outdoor space, or having accessibility to transit, or improving indoor air quality, and taking that and showing that there's a measurable impact on health through various kind of health outcomes or various kind of health impact categories, I would say. So, if we take kind of mental health, for example, if you are in buildings that have access to outdoor space, if you have views of nature from your work site, if you have access to natural daylight, you can show a true positive impact on the health of occupants. And that positive impact can be shown in things like productivity, even things like indoor air quality. If we're able to optimize indoor air quality practices within buildings, we're actually able to show not only an impact in things like mental health or occupant health, but we can also look at things like occupant productivity. And these types of kind of measurements allow companies to really create a strategic plan to prioritize health and prioritize green initiatives and move them one step forward into some broader kind of sustainability or ESG agendas that their investors and the financial community is really looking for as they evaluate their options and opportunities.
Right. And again, from an investor standpoint, it's basically about, excuse me, return. I mean, from just a dollars and cents thing. Although baked into that is the fact that people want to be there, whether that be your tenant as a company or the company's employees, or that there's some sort of an inviting space. I would think would be kind of the key to any kind of a creating a desirable environment, desirable property. So I'm curious, as this conversation has changed from we mentioned the kind of the energy consumption to now more of the green space and the mental health. In like the energy space, there were like incentives that were made available to property owners through the utilities, and possibly even code change was implemented to kind of promote this and implement this. Are there any similar type? Are you seeing building codes kind of create this space or require it, or are there any incentives for building owners to create these spaces?
Yeah, so healthy buildings are relative.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. When I say incentives, I want to make sure that obviously the incentive to create the nice space for the occupants, but more of like some sort of financial incentive where there was like I said, some of the utilities had some sort of money available for building owners that would convert their energy usage.
Yeah, absolutely. So, healthy buildings are relatively new, in this idea that a building can impact your health from the broader real estate community or investment community. It's relatively new. I mean, green buildings have, that idea has been kind of proliferating for the last couple of decades. So when we think about green buildings and we think about, incentives, yes, there's those regulations or those, financial incentives about, tax breaks or things like that to help drive the development of kind of your typical green buildings. But the financial incentive, I think, for traditional green buildings has always been around things like operational protocols. So if you are creating more energy efficient buildings, you can reduce your kind of operating expenses through savings on that on those aspects. I think we also, when we look at green buildings, we're starting to see more and more over the last decade that they actually can drive higher occupancy rates. So we're seeing that more and more these buildings that are considered green are seeing higher sales prices, or they're seeing higher leasing prices. They're seeing more stable tenants. They're seeing tenants that are signing on for longer lease terms. And part of that goes back to those operating expenses, right? With the growth of triple net leases, green buildings offer more stability, I think, for those employers and those tenants of commercial, office, and industrial spaces to say, we can reduce our risk of fluctuating energy prices or of maybe issues related to climate change. So you certainly have those reduced operating costs both for the owner and the employer. And then that's leading to, I think, some more stability in terms of occupancy rates. And that's I think a huge part of the scope that I think stakeholders and investors are looking at when they're identifying these different properties. But part of the new part of the conversation is what we call, I will say, brown discounts. So buildings that are not kind of building to these green codes or retrofitted to be energy efficient or to include some of these healthy building practices like access to transit, outdoor amenity spaces, access to natural daylight. We're seeing that those owners are actually struggling to keep and retain tenants, and they may actually have to provide discounts on leasing out space or renting out that space. And if they're not willing to make the investment and updates to these buildings to be able to show those green building practices or those healthy building practices, they may actually have to, unload these properties at a discount, because they're really become a risk to their portfolio and a risk to their investment. I'm based in New York, and recently they passed the Climate Mobilization Act, which there can be fines and fees for properties over a certain size that don't hit certain kind of emissions caps. So now some of these additional assets, especially in the office market, there are even fines and some legal action risks that can come from the building not being optimized for kind of these green and healthy outcomes. And I think that the financial community is really taking a look at that and saying there's an incentive not only from the bottom up, so tenants are asking for more of these amenities and more of these kind of operational savings by having energy efficiency, by having access to amenities. But we're also seeing the kind of financial institutions asking for how are you minimizing risk related to things like climate change, but also health. And COVID-19 has certainly shown us that healthy buildings are a must-have now and not a nice-to-have, because we're still kind of going through the I think the recovery. I mean, many of the office market is only 30 to 40% occupied right now, and they're struggling to attract employees and attract employers back to the office. And part of that is these real estate owners and operators and managers are going to have to find ways to build trust among the occupier community, and get people back to the office by saying we are considering your health, your safety. We're creating more resilient spaces, and bring them back through that kind of trust building and that communication. But a silver lining from the last 2 years with COVID, at least from my perspective, is that we have a much more knowledgeable set of employers and employees and residents who are understanding the link between health and the places they live and work. And they're understanding how green building practices and healthy building practices affect them. So whether it be your office or your home or the places you learn or the places you shop, they're asking for more and they're demanding more from kind of the real estate community on how they're delivering, designing, and renovating these spaces. And that's certainly an incentive for a lot of these companies, and the financial markets and the investors have noticed that, and they've taken into account in their own kind of scopes, how do we ensure the stability of our assets? And they're saying they have to be kind of looking at their environmental impact. They have to be looking at their social impact in terms of health and how it's impacting occupants, because this rise of maybe ESG or environmental and social governance issues and standards are really playing a role in the proliferation of green buildings and healthy buildings and changing the markets as we come to know them.
So do you see that the majority of the green is in new construction, or is there a healthy retrofit for existing buildings?
Sure. So I think in many cities and in many municipalities, designing to green buildings is becoming the standard. I mean, I look at across and designing to healthy buildings is becoming the standard. I look at across a lot of Fitwell users and a lot of Fitwell, the real estate companies who are using Fitwell, and they are baking them into their design standards. They are going to build to be able to stand against the Fitwell standard, and they are going to design new developments and new sites or complete major renovations or major repositioning of buildings and sites to be designed to leverage things like Fitwell or other green building certifications and platforms like LEED. So that, I think, is definitely a growing body of knowledge that we have to build to these standards, because that's what the new crop of employees and employers is going to be asking for. One of the real benefits of the Fitwell platform is that it was actually designed for existing buildings. So Fitwell was developed by the CDC and the GSA between 2010 and 2015, and it was designed for existing buildings. Because when we think about kind of making green buildings or healthy buildings a part of your just operational protocol and a part of your standard and culture as an organization, whether it be an occupier, real estate, or developer, you need to be able to use it across your entire portfolio to really show those impacts. And to get back to something we talked about earlier, which is to really measure the impact you're having on those environmental metrics, or to measure those impacts you're having on kind of occupant health and safety, you need to roll it out across at scale. It can't just be on one or two flagship new construction buildings, because most portfolios out there are going to be 90% existing assets that have another few decades left in their lifespan. So Fitwell being designed for existing buildings was really a game changer for the industry to say we can look at not only our new construction projects, but we can also look at all of our existing buildings and find ways to optimize those through some low cost but high impact strategies. We talk about things like having access transit or outdoor space, or even kind of opening up stairwells to allow individuals to circulate up the building using stairs instead of the elevators. A lot of these things are low cost to implement, but they have a huge impact in the occupant experience or a huge impact in occupant satisfaction rates, and can really drive some of those metrics you're looking for. And because they're low cost, I think you see some of those financial returns being at a much kind of higher premium. If you can roll this out across your portfolio, you can begin to measure and manage, if I'm doing these things across all of my commercial office assets, are we seeing increased stability in tenants? Are we seeing longer leases? Are we seeing higher tenant satisfaction rates? Being able to use those things to measure what your investments will be in the future, I think is truly key to rolling these out.
All right. A frustration of mine that I've seen, and is more in the consumer space, but it's just, a lot of the energy efficiency products, they use less material in the manufacturing, but they only last, half or maybe 25% of what the old traditional conventional product was, whether it be a refrigerator or washer dryer, whatever it might be, kind of thing. But I'm curious in this conversation with the kind of going green, is there a cost? I mean, if you had two projects, one being a conventional, one being a more of a green model, is there a cost difference in the actual implementation of the two methods or the two types?
Great question. So every location is going to be different based off the size of the project, region, location, access to materials. I'd say the sooner you bake in things like healthy building practices or a standard like Fitwell into the design and development of a project, the more you're going to reduce the capital cost of implementing those kind of green building operational protocols, or those green building or those healthy building design elements. So we're seeing a lot, and again, another reason a lot of those companies are baking Fitwell into their design programs is because they're trying to reduce the cost of creating healthy buildings. There's always going to be a little bit more of a premium if you're kind of renovating a building to meet a green standard or meet a healthy building standard like Fitwell. I think the beauty of Fitwell and the platform that we've built is there is a ton of strategies, about 70 plus across each of our different asset level scorecards. And you as the consumer get to choose based off of your occupant profile, your budget, your location. How do you want to create a healthy building? What strategies will mean the most to your occupants? Again, a building in downtown Manhattan versus a building out in Westchester County versus a building maybe in a more rural location, they're going to have different needs based off their occupants, based off their budgets, based off their space considerations. So being able to choose strategies that work for you, I think, is key to keeping those costs down. And Fitwell's designed, again, some really low cost, high impact strategies that will move the needle in showing how you are impacting health, but are also based off 100 years of public health research. We tend to think about healthy building practices, and maybe we kind of entered this earlier when we talked about LED lighting versus accessibility to transit. Some of these things are not new. Some of these things are not uh, are not things we haven't thought about before. I mean, Fitwell is based off 100 years of public health research. It's really about how to implement it in buildings to design it in a way that it improves the occupant experience and that it allows companies to roll it out at scale. And being able to do something across your entire portfolio, like indoor air quality practices around ventilation or around cleaning protocols or emergency preparedness is incredibly key. And as we look at, the industrial developments that are coming down the pipeline and how they're optimizing for, occupant safety or occupant health, the more you can bake those things in the early stages, the less expensive it's going to be to think about these things, and the less expensive it will be to kind of renovate buildings in the future to meet this demand or to meet this need.
No, that's great. You continue to mention the Fitwell thing, and I just want to make sure that I'm understanding. You said something about CDC and the GSA created this, but then it sounded like your group is halfway or partly involved in this. Can you kind of explain the relationship and what the Fitwell, I mean, the overall concept is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Fitwell is a healthy building platform that helps the real estate communities and designers kind of understand how a building's operational protocols and design practices are going to impact the health of occupants. And we take a holistic and interrelated approach to helping companies understand and prioritize the health of their occupants and the communities that they serve through evidence-based strategies that are proven to promote health. And then we take those strategies and we show you through a series of metrics and health impact data how exactly you're impacting the health of your occupants through certain strategies or protocols, and how you can measurably track changes in occupant health outcomes by implementing certain building practices. So Fitwell was actually, again, like I said, created by leading practitioners at the CDC and piloted across a portion of the GSA's portfolio between 2010 and about 2015. And then the Center for Active Design, the organization I work for, was chosen to bring Fitwell to marketplace. So the Center for Active Design, or I'll call it CFAD from now on, CFAD is responsible for the platform's development and growth and maintenance, and active design advisors was rolled out in last year to help kind of implement our scalable strategy of Fitwell and drive kind of market transformation. Our goal is to really motivate the entire real estate design industry towards thinking about healthy buildings and thinking about how we can include this idea about healthy buildings and green buildings into every kind of stage of decision making. Our organization still work closely with the CDC to help us kind of provide and understand research, along with about a dozen other kind of academic and research institutions. And we've been very successful, I think, over the last 4 years, helping to communicate what does it mean to be a healthy building, and what does it mean to utilize our resources to understand how your portfolios are impacting health, and how you can make changes to further drive that impact, and how you can measure that impact so that you can use it for your sustainability or ESG reporting or financial reporting.
Got it. Is the Fitwell model designed to apply strictly to like the office asset class, or does it have information across the investment spectrum, industrial, retail, does it fit all of the different asset classes?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got different, we call them scorecards, but different scorecards for kind of the commercial office asset class, retail, multifamily, residential, senior housing. And we also have one specifically for kind of commercial and industrial sites that's been designed for the industrial asset owners and investors to ensure that the sites they develop and manage are tailored to promote health and well-being amongst their tenants. So we have different scorecards for different asset types. When the workplace scorecard is certainly our longest and legacy product, with industrial and senior housing being some of our most recent. We also have scorecards for individual occupiers of real estate. So really looking at the tenant and how they can fit out their own fit outs, whether it be within industrial spaces or retail spaces, or within kind of multi-tenanted commercial office buildings. I'll say our industrial site scorecard is one of the few available certifications for those industrial sites. And there's been a lot of interest from that kind of asset class, as they look to kind of better communicate or strengthen the things that they're doing around healthy and green buildings. There's also a huge opportunity now to differentiate your products through health and well-being. I was reading a report yesterday from Dodge that said they're forecasting about 53 billion in construction starts in kind of the warehouse and distribution market this year, and that'll account for about a third of the entire U.S. commercial construction sector. As we see a lot more of that kind of square footage of industrial space, warehouse and distribution and logistics hit the market, being able to differentiate yourself through a product like Fitwell, using whether it be commercial office or industrial, that'll be huge to making sure that you are still accessing those top tier tenants, that you're still being able to stabilize your tenants that you've already signed, and continue leasing with them and continue working with them.
So do you find that most of the interest comes from the landlord, or is there a drive from the tenants to, are they pushing the market based on what they're most likely to lease, or is there an action reaction?
Yeah, it's kind of a perfect storm, right? I mean, we actually did a survey of the real estate investment community in I would say between September of 2020 and the report released in March of 2021, looking at, investor sentiment around healthy buildings. And we found that, 87% of real estate investors responded that they were experiencing increased demand for healthy buildings. And that demand was really being driven by their tenants, particularly in office and residential, that those tenants were demanding things around healthy building practices and protocols. And that was kind of driving them. But at the same time, we found that there's this rise for kind of more kind of material ESG related data. And while I think green building certifications and things around energy and waste and water have really solidified the E, or the environmental component of that kind of reporting, companies and large real estate investment trusts and managers were looking for ways to better solidify that S metric. And they found that health and well-being and the kind of metrics that Fitwell provides through their kind of through the online platform were great ways to further strengthen that reporting on S and really show how health and well-being were kind of becoming proxies for that kind of that S metric, if you will. So tenants were really driving demand, but I think the need to respond to their financial investors and really show a more material assessment of S was also a huge driver for them. And I think, again, I'll say, as COVID has changed the perceptions of individual employees and residents alike, they're demanding more from the place that they live and the place that they work. So we've always had a large number of real estate owners and investors using the Fitwell platform. In the last, I'd say, year or so, we've seen a huge increase from the multifamily asset class, from the industrial asset class, but also from those kind of individual occupiers of real estate saying, we want to make sure that our HR policies, our operational policies, the way we're designing our own workspaces are going to optimize employees' health, especially when it comes to mental health outcomes or social equity, or in industrial spaces, occupant safety in those environments.
It's fascinating how these things that can affect just the well-being and one's just having a good day or not, kind of thing, or an inviting space. That's great. I was going to ask you a question, and it's like all of a sudden just slipped my mind here. Well, let me do this. Let me shift gears here for a second. Zach, by day, I'm an insurance broker, and I work with my clients to assess risk and determine what to do with the risk. And there's three strategies we typically consider. We first look to see if there's a way to avoid the risk. If we can't avoid it, we look to see if there's a way to minimize the risk. And then if we cannot avoid nor minimize, we look to see if there's a way we can transfer the risk. And that's what an insurance policy is a risk transfer vehicle. And I like to ask my guests if they can look at their own situation. It could be their clients, investors, the market, government, however you choose to frame the question. But I like to ask my guests, and I'd like to ask you too, what you consider to be the biggest risk. And for clarification, like I said, while I'm an insurance broker, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance related answer. But with that, if you're willing, I'd like to ask you, Zack Flora, what is the biggest risk?
Yeah, Darren, absolutely. And I'm going to come at it from the point of the real estate community. And there's this growing need to be able to kind of measure and implement green and healthy building initiatives. And I think the biggest risk to the real estate community today is to not understand what it means to be a healthy building, not understand what it means to what those concepts are around creating a healthy building, and to too narrowly focus in on kind of one set of aspects. So if it's an industrial, to too narrowly focus in on maybe things like workplace injury, or commercial office space, to too narrowly focus in on things like indoor air quality, or to say we're doing energy efficiency and that's going to be enough. Being that this idea of healthy buildings are relatively new, even though the evidence base has been around for 100 years, companies and the real estate community specifically, they need to understand exactly how their buildings are performing against a set of related metrics, so that they can begin to figure out how to manage and measure the risk related to health. And we can come back to that office environment. We have low occupancy rates still. We're struggling to get people back into the office. If you don't know how your properties are actually impacting health right now, you're not going to be able to make the effective changes to build that trust and reduce and mitigate that risk moving forward. You're not going to be able to figure out, how do I prevent reduced occupancies in the face of maybe a future contagious or respiratory infectious disease outbreak like COVID-19. We're not going to be able to understand, how do I control for mental health issues and social equity issues that my tenants and their employees are asking about. So not being able to kind of look at the broader picture, understand where you're starting from, so you can make a really strategic and informed plan moving forward, is, I think, the biggest risk to saying you're not going to be able to see some of the returns we talked about unless you know exactly where you're starting from and setting goals and being able to meet them. You're not going to be able to see those kind of the stability of tenants. You're not going to be able to see that return on investment because maybe you're too narrow in your focus, or maybe you didn't know where to start and you didn't know where you were, so you didn't start appropriately in kind of retrofitting or designing or implementing healthy buildings into your culture.
No, it's certainly a topic that I'm certain every investor wants their property to be the most desirable, so they can attract the highest rents and the highest sale price, kind of thing. But it's not I think there's a lot of times when you have some sort of new concept, there's kind of a kind of trying to get your hands around it, or trying to understand exactly what it is. But it's certainly, and like you said, with the whole COVID experience, it certainly raised the awareness overall of just how impactful the environment is on one's health and that. So that's great. The question I had meant to ask you, and this kind of ties in as we wrap up here, the Fitwell system, is it a platform that anyone can access, or is it something that they have to go through a vendor to get to, or how can one learn more about the Fitwell system?
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone can utilize Fitwell. You don't have to utilize any specific vendor or any specific consultant. Anybody can find out more by going to www.fitwell, that's FITWEL.org. there you can learn more about kind of what is Fitwell, how does it work, and access our kind of our proprietary online technology that will allow you to, like I said, upload your entire portfolio, understand, assess your property against the Fitwell standard, access some of those health metrics, and be able to make informed decisions about how to kind of improve the performance and the impact that your real estate assets are having on their occupants. But yeah, open to everybody. And if anyone's interested in learning more from me specifically, they can email info@fitwell.org to find out more about myself or how the Fitwell platform works or how they can get started with it.
And just to be clear, Fitwell is Fitwel. Is there not two L's?
There's one L, so Fitwel. You're correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure I heard your answer. Awesome. Well, Zack, I have learned a bunch. I appreciate you taking the time to talk today, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Yeah, Darren, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next time we chat.
You got it. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CRE PN Radio.